There was a time when the north was believed to be nothing but ice, wind, and eternal silence. But what if I told you that, buried deep in humanity's collective memory, there once existed a land at the top of the world where the sun never set? A paradise whispered by the ancient Greeks under a name that still glows with mystery. Hyperborea, meaning beyond Boreas, the god of the north wind. In mythology, it was a realm untouched by winter, a place of endless daylight, where humanity lived in harmony with the laws of the cosmos. But what if this was not a mere poetic invention, but a distorted memory of a prehistoric civilization, one that flourished before recorded history began? If we look at geological maps from tens of thousands of years ago, an astonishing truth emerges. The Arctic wasn't always frozen. During the Holocene warm periods, when the Earth's axial tilt and ocean currents shifted slightly, the poles were temperate. Scientists call it the green Arctic. Imagine forests, rivers, and plains where now there is only ice. According to ancient Greek poets, this was the home of Hyperborea, the paradise beyond the north wind, a realm without war, sickness, or death. So the question arises, was Hyperborea merely the product of mythic imagination, or could it be the echo of a forgotten reality? Why did the Greeks, people of the Mediterranean, write with such conviction about a northern land they had never seen? They didn't speak of Hyperborea as fantasy, but as a geographic truth. It was said to lie north of Thrace, beyond the blasts of winter. In the verses of Pindar, Hyperborea was a land where night is banished and light reigns forever. To the Greeks, it was not a metaphor but the dwelling place of gods when they grew weary of the human world. And among those gods, one name shines brighter than all others, Apollo, god of light, prophecy, and music. According to Greek tradition, Apollo did not remain in Greece all year. Each winter, when darkness spread across the human realm, he would fly to the north, to his true homeland, Hyperborea. It was there that he was rejuvenated. And when he returned in spring, so too did light and prophecy. This cycle, said to repeat every 19 years, coincides eerily with the Metonic cycle, a lunar calendar system used by Greek astronomers. Could this return of Apollo have been an encoded memory of celestial patterns known to a civilization far older than Greece itself? If Apollo represents the sun, then the myth takes on new meaning. Above the Arctic Circle, there are months when the sun truly never sets. To Mediterranean cultures, this would have seemed miraculous. But perhaps it was a factual observation passed down from travelers, or survivors, of a world that existed before the ice returned. And if that is true, Hyperborea was not a dream. It was a memory. Some 19th century scholars propose that Hyperborea was once located in what is now Scandinavia or northern Siberia, regions that, geological evidence suggests, were once covered in forests. The ancient historian Diodorus Siculus wrote of a vast island the size of Sicily, filled with fertile fields and enormous temples dedicated to Apollo. He even mentioned that pilgrims traveled there from Greece to honor the god, implying an actual route between civilizations. If it were pure fantasy, why such precision? Why measurements, rituals, and social detail? These fragments sound less like imagination and more like the last reflections of a place erased by time. When Friedrich Nietzsche later wrote, "Neither by land nor by sea shall you find the road to the Hyperboreans," he may not have been speaking metaphorically. The Greek accounts tell us that travelers who ventured northward were stopped by storms, by mountains, or by forces they could not name. The path had once existed, but something, a shift of the earth itself, perhaps, had sealed it forever. Still, every myth hides a seed of truth. And Hyperborea, if it existed, was not only a location but a state of being, where humanity lived in pure light, untouched by war or disease, existing in harmony with the gods. Pindar described the Hyperboreans as singing, dancing, and sacrificing to the gods, their lives free from aging or decay. They were, in essence, the image of humankind before the fall, before corruption entered the world. It's easy to dismiss such ideas as fantasy. Yet nearly every ancient civilization spoke of a golden age, an age before time, when humans lived in peace, long life, and union with divine forces.
The Greeks called it the Age of Kronos. The Hindus called it Satya Yuga. The Norse called it the first epoch of Asgard. Could all of these myths be fragments of a single origin story, one that points back to the same luminous north? Today, when we look at the Arctic from orbit, we see a world of ice and silence.
But scientists and pilots have long noted its strangeness. Compass needles twist erratically. Radio signals fade or bend. Auroras blaze without solar storms to trigger them. To geophysicists, these are magnetic anomalies. But to those who still believe in Hyperborea, they are scars, or perhaps traces, of a network of energy that once pulsed across the poles. Standing beneath the northern lights, it is easy to feel that you are watching something ancient, not merely the dance of particles, but the memory of a world that once glowed with unending day. Perhaps, buried under that ice, lies not just frozen earth, but the sleeping heart of humanity's first civilization. Maybe Hyperborea was never lost. Maybe it was simply covered, by time, by snow, by forgetting. And perhaps when the ice finally melts, what awakens beneath it will remind us that the myth of the paradise beyond the north wind was never just a story. It was a chapter, torn from our history, still burning faintly in the light that never dies. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea as if they were remembering something they once knew but could no longer reach. To them, it was both legend and geography, a paradox frozen in verse. But modern science, though far removed from the language of poetry, has begun to uncover hints that align uncannily with those ancient words. Beneath the ice of the Arctic lies not just frozen land, but traces of a climate that once supported life. The Holocene warm period, for instance, was a time when the Earth's poles were not cloaked in snow, but green. Geological cores from Siberia and Greenland reveal layers of pollen, leaves, and even the fossilized remains of animals that should not have been there. Bison, horses, even temperate fish. If the poles were once habitable, then perhaps the idea of a northern paradise is not so far-fetched after all. Science has always sought to erase myth, but here, it seems to circle back to it. The ancient claim that the far north was once lush finds a curious echo in climate models. During the last interglacial periods, global temperatures rose high enough to melt large portions of the polar ice caps. The result? Vast plains of open tundra, rivers, and perhaps even forests. Imagine the North Pole not as a frozen wasteland, but as a land where the midnight sun truly never set, a landscape of silver light and endless day. It is here, perhaps, that the memory of Hyperborea was born. When we compare this to the Greek accounts, the resonance deepens. Pindar's verses of "a land where night is banished" match perfectly with what occurs beyond the Arctic Circle every summer. And when Herodotus wrote of the Hyperboreans, living beyond the reach of Boreas, the god of the north wind, he may have been echoing a story passed down from seafaring ancestors, traders or wanderers who had seen the northern lights and mistook them for the gates of heaven. But mythology does not preserve facts, it preserves impressions. What the ancients remembered as gods may have been natural forces, interpreted through awe. To them, Apollo was not just a deity, he was the embodiment of light and order. If he was said to return to Hyperborea each winter, that could symbolize the retreat of the sun to the polar region, vanishing from Greece only to reign in a realm where the light never fades. In this sense, Hyperborea could be the mythic personification of the North Pole itself, a spiritual pole of the world, the axis around which the heavens turn. Ancient temples across the world were built with this concept in mind, the axis mundi, the cosmic center. To the Greeks, Hyperborea was not just north, it was the pivot of the universe, the place where the divine and the earthly intertwined. Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, described Hyperborea in meticulous terms. He spoke of a large island the size of Sicily, where the sun's warmth nourished fertile fields and where an immense temple to Apollo stood, round in shape, perfectly aligned with the movement of the stars. Pilgrims, he said, journeyed there regularly, bringing offerings to the god. To the modern ear, this sounds fantastical, but there is an unsettling familiarity in his description. A circular temple aligned with celestial motion, does that not call to mind Stonehenge or the solar sanctuaries of Egypt? Could it be that Diodorus was describing not fantasy, but a memory of a sacred architectural pattern that once spread across the world? Every civilization has its north, its imagined origin of purity. For the Greeks, it was Hyperborea. For the Vedic Indians, it was Uttara Kuru, the land of radiant beings beyond the Himalayas. For the Persians, it was Vaija, the original homeland of the Aryans, said to lie in the far north before the world froze. The Norse called it Asgard, the realm of the gods, shining in the cold sky. The parallels are uncanny. Each culture, separated by thousands of miles and centuries, spoke of a luminous northern race, tall, long-lived, and wise beyond human measure. Coincidence? Or the residue of shared memory, echoes of a civilization that once stood at the roof of the world before it was lost beneath ice? Even the word boreal in modern English, meaning northern, preserves the same root as Boreas, the god of the north wind. It's as though language itself has carried the ghost of this ancient idea, quietly, for millennia. Archaeological curiosity has begun to flirt with this possibility. Certain satellite surveys over the Arctic have revealed geometric anomalies, lines, formations, and magnetic signatures that do not fit natural explanations. While mainstream science attributes them to tectonic fractures or glacial patterns, fringe researchers whisper of buried structures, domes, and even symmetrical grids under the ice. These are, of course, speculations. But one can't help noticing that the same pattern repeats across the globe. From Giza to Teotihuacan, from Stonehenge to the pyramids of China. Monuments built with stellar alignment, all oriented toward celestial north. Is it possible that these cultures inherited the same geometric code, from a teacher older than them all? Could Hyperborea have been the origin point of this knowledge? The philosopher René Guénon once suggested that all sacred traditions point back to a primordial polar civilization, the spiritual center of the earth. In his view, the flood myths, the lost continents, and the paradises of light all stemmed from this one source, a civilization wiped away by catastrophe, its wisdom scattered among the survivors. If he was right, then the myth of Hyperborea isn't a Greek invention. It's a remnant of universal memory. And perhaps that is why the Greeks wrote of it not as legend, but as loss. They didn't imagine Hyperborea, they remembered it. They mourned a homeland they had never seen, yet somehow felt in their bones. To them, Apollo's departure to the north wasn't mere metaphor, it was nostalgia. The light leaving the human world, returning home to where it was pure. It is here that myth and science briefly hold hands. The geological record tells us the poles were once green. The myths tell us a paradise of light existed there. Together they whisper a possibility, that once, long before our calendars began, civilization bloomed where the world now lies frozen. And if Hyperborea truly existed, then perhaps the Arctic is not the end of the world. It is its beginning. If the Arctic once bloomed with life, then who lived there? Ancient texts speak not of ordinary humans, but of beings so radiant and harmonious that the Greeks described them as immortal. Herodotus called them the people beyond the north wind, tall, fair, and untouched by decay. Pindar wrote that they lived without sickness or old age, their lives spent in music, dances, and offerings to the gods. These descriptions, repeated for centuries, give the Hyperboreans a near-divine aura. Yet the details feel too human, too specific, to be pure mythology. They had temples, they sang songs, they celebrated the cycles of the sun. It's as though the poets were not inventing gods, but describing a forgotten humanity that lived closer to the divine than we ever have. The Hyperboreans, according to the Greeks, lived in perfect harmony with nature. Their world was a realm of balance, where the rhythm of life mirrored the movement of the heavens. They needed no war, no laws, no kings, because they lived in resonance with the cosmic order itself. Ancient philosophers later interpreted this as an allegory, a memory of the golden age before the fall of humankind. But what if it was not allegory at all? What if it was a record of how humans once lived before the Earth's climate and consciousness shifted? Even their lifespan was said to defy the natural order. They lived not decades, but centuries. Some accounts claim as long as 1,000 years. When death came, it was by choice, not by decay. The Hyperboreans, it was said, did not die, but depart, leaving their bodies willingly, returning to the light from which they came. It was not tragedy, but transcendence. And yet, for all their purity, they were not disconnected from the world. They were, in fact, the bridge between gods and men. The Greeks believed that Apollo himself, god of light, prophecy, and healing, was born among them. His visits every 19 years were not metaphorical, but ritual, part of an exchange that bound the heavens and the earth together. Offerings were sent from Hyperborea to the Temple of Delphi, carried by sacred maidens, or, as the myth says, by swans. These gifts linked the Arctic paradise to the spiritual heart of Greece, forming an invisible chain across continents. Such an idea raises a haunting question. If Apollo was a god of Greece, why did he abandon his own temples to return to the far north? Why did his divine rejuvenation depend on this hidden race? Perhaps the Greeks themselves sensed that their wisdom came from elsewhere, from a civilization older and purer than their own. And that civilization, if the accounts hold any truth, was not primitive. Diodorus Siculus described Hyperborea as home to a temple of extraordinary size and perfection, spherical in shape, aligned with the movements of the stars. He wrote that the Hyperboreans studied the rising and setting of celestial bodies with great accuracy, suggesting not only spiritual reverence, but scientific mastery. The temple, he said, shone in the light of the eternal sun. The sphere, perfect, endless, and symmetrical, was the ultimate symbol of divine order. For the Greeks, it represented the cosmos itself. So why did Diodorus emphasize the spherical shape of the Hyperborean temple? Perhaps because he knew it mirrored something real. Spherical or circular temples exist across the ancient world. Stonehenge in Britain, Nabta Playa in Egypt's desert, Chaco Canyon in the Americas, all aligned with solar or stellar cycles. These were not isolated coincidences. They were variations of a single architectural language. Across thousands of miles and millennia, cultures built their sacred sites according to geometry that reflected the sky. The pyramids of Giza align with Orion's belt. Teotihuacan mirrors the Milky Way. The Mayan temples of Chichen Itza track the equinoxes. The Hyperborean temple, said to follow the same cosmic code, may have been the origin point of this entire pattern, the first school of sacred architecture. If true, then the knowledge of Hyperborea did not vanish. It migrated, disguised in stone, encoded in myth, waiting for future civilizations to rediscover its principles. And perhaps that is why we find echoes of the same geometry everywhere. Temples built on magnetic nodes, monuments following the Fibonacci sequence, structures that seem to sing when struck by wind or sound. These were not the works of coincidence. They were instruments, resonant machines meant to align the earth with the heavens. To ancient eyes, the city was not a place to live. It was a living calendar, a map of the cosmos. And Hyperborea, the land of endless light, may have been the prototype, the first city built in perfect resonance with the stars. But what kind of people could conceive such harmony? The Greeks described the Hyperboreans as beings of phos, light. Some took that literally. Skin glowing like dawn, eyes reflecting the sun, bodies luminous with inner vitality. Others believed the light was spiritual, a consciousness so elevated it radiated through form. Either way, the idea of radiant beings is not unique to Greece. The Vedic texts speak of shining devas in the far north. Norse legends tell of the Aesir, tall and luminous, dwelling in Asgard. Even ancient Persian hymns praise the holy race of the north who guarded divine fire. Were these merely overlapping myths, or independent recollections of the same race? If humanity once reached a higher state of being, one aligned with the earth and the cosmos, it would explain much of what we call impossible. The precise astronomical alignments of megalithic sites, the harmonic ratios found in pyramids, the near-perfect engineering achieved without metal tools. Perhaps these were not the results of brute labor, but of consciousness operating on another frequency, a frequency we have since forgotten. It is no wonder that the Hyperboreans became symbols of purity. To later mystics and philosophers, they represented the first human ideal, beings whose minds and environment resonated in perfect balance. In their world, day never turned to night, truth never gave way to illusion, and life never separated from the divine. If such people truly existed, then the fall of Hyperborea was not just a geological catastrophe, it was a spiritual one. The loss of the north was the loss of the light within humanity itself. And perhaps, every time we build a temple, align a monument to the stars, or stare in awe at the northern lights, we are, without realizing it, trying to remember what the Hyperboreans once knew. When legends spoke of Hyperborea's radiant light, they may have been describing more than sunlight. Some ancient texts hinted that the land itself glowed, that its cities shimmered with a luminosity unlike anything known to man. To modern ears, this sounds fantastical, yet traces of such a concept run through nearly every ancient tradition. Hyperborea, they said, was a realm powered not by fire or metal, but by crystal. Its towers of quartz and translucent stone captured the natural harmonics of the earth. These were not mere decorations, but instruments, conduits of energy, tuned to the frequency of the planet itself. To understand this, imagine a civilization that learned to harness the piezoelectric properties of quartz, the ability of certain crystals to generate electrical charge when compressed or struck. Today, this principle drives our watches, radios, and electronics. But what if it had once been used on a monumental scale? If the Hyperboreans existed during a time when the poles were temperate, the crust of the earth beneath them would have been rich in magnetic energy. The interaction of crystal, magnetism, and resonance could, in theory, produce fields of energy capable of lighting a city without flame, a living light, humming softly in the air. Ancient myths call these the radiant spires, towers that pulsed with the heartbeat of the earth. The Greeks described them as temples that sang. Some scholars, revisiting Diodorus's writings, have wondered whether the harmonic frequencies mentioned in Hyperborean lore were metaphors for music, or literal vibrations, sound waves that sustained both architecture and life. If so, the Hyperboreans may have practiced what we now call acoustic engineering, shaping stone and crystal into resonant chambers that amplified natural energy. And perhaps in those frequencies they found healing. The Hyperboreans, according to fragments of myth, had no sickness. They did not rely on medicine in the sense we know it. Instead, they tuned the human body like an instrument, aligning it with the Earth's own vibration. The body to them was not a machine of matter but an echo of energy, easily disrupted when harmony was lost. Using tones, crystals, and geometric resonance, they restored health by re-establishing alignment between body and world. The same logic appears in later traditions: Tibetan singing bowls, Egyptian sound chambers, Vedic mantras, all remnants of a forgotten acoustic science. If this sounds impossible, consider what modern research now knows. Sound can influence cellular structures. Vibrations can reorganize matter, a phenomenon called cymatics. Piezoelectric materials convert pressure into energy. Crystals can store and transmit information. The difference between Hyperborean myth and modern science may not be the what, but the how. They saw these truths as sacred. We call them physics. There are hints that such technology left fingerprints behind. Satellite readings show that certain regions of the Arctic emit magnetic anomalies. intense electromagnetic surges not explained by geology alone. Instruments malfunction, compasses whirl. Pilots have reported auroras appearing without solar flares, as though something beneath the ice was still pulsing. Mainstream geophysicists attribute this to fluctuations in Earth's core, but others wonder, what if we are detecting the dormant relics of a power grid, the veins of a world that once breathed light? The same question echoes elsewhere. Why do so many ancient monuments align with magnetic hotspots? Why do temples from Egypt to Mesoamerica sit atop natural electromagnetic lines, what mystics later called ley lines? Even the oracle at Delphi was built above a fissure that emitted mysterious vapors, believed to connect the priestess to the divine. Could it be that sacred sites across the world were built upon remnants of a global energy network, one that began in the north? Perhaps the secret of Hyperborea was not mechanical at all, but mental. The legends speak of the Hyperboreans as masters of consciousness, beings who communicated without words, through pure thought. Telepathy was their language, and honesty their law. In a society where minds are transparent, deceit cannot survive. Communication becomes communion. This idea, though mythic, mirrors what some modern neuroscientists have explored. Brainwave synchronization, empathy transmission, quantum entanglement of neural states. The Hyperboreans may have embodied what physics now calls non-local consciousness, a mind connected beyond physical space. Imagine such a world, cities built as resonant instruments, citizens speaking in thought, vibrating in harmony with the planet's pulse. Reality itself shaped not by labor, but by intention. Ancient sources even suggest the Hyperboreans could move stone by will. Absurd, perhaps, yet we face the same mystery when we look at the megaliths of old. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons, lifted with precision no modern crane could match. Every culture attributes their construction to the gods or those who came before. But what if those gods were simply people who had mastered the resonance between mind and matter? The idea reappears everywhere. In Egyptian legend, where the god Thoth moves stone by sound. In Tibetan myth, where monks raise boulders with chanting. In Hebrew scripture, where the Ark of the Covenant hums with divine energy. The common denominator is vibration, consciousness interacting with structure. In this light, Hyperborea may have been less a civilization of machines and more a civilization of minds. Perhaps that is why they left so little trace. A people who could build with sound and thought would leave behind harmony, not ruins. Their cities would dissolve into the landscape like music fading into silence. Still, the silence remembers. Magnetic anomalies, auroras without cause, the faint hum of the earth itself, these may be the last echoes of their science, still resonating beneath the poles. Hyperborea may have been destroyed, but its principles endure, buried not just under ice, but within us. For what the myths truly describe is not an external technology, but an internal one. Consciousness as the ultimate instrument of creation. The Hyperboreans, it seems, did not conquer nature, they became it. Their technology was alignment, their power was understanding, their language was resonance. And if their civilization truly vanished, it might not be because it failed, but because it transcended. Rising beyond matter, leaving behind only the faint electric whisper we still hear when we listen to the wind of the north. Paradises rarely end quietly. The myths of the world agree on this point. Every golden age is swallowed by catastrophe. Hyperborea was no exception. The Greeks never described its decline in detail, only that one day the sun no longer shone there, and the people were gone beyond reach. To modern minds, that sounds like poetic closure. But geology tells another story, one far colder and far more sudden. Scientists studying the Arctic permafrost have found mammoths frozen mid-meal, their stomachs still full of undigested plants from temperate regions. Such a thing could only happen in an instant, an abrupt flash freeze. The temperature would have had to plummet tens of degrees in hours. What could cause such a cataclysm? Some point to a rapid pole shift, a reorientation of the Earth's axis that transformed the lush polar plains into an icy tomb almost overnight. Others suspect a comet impact, or a solar storm so fierce it destabilized the planet's climate. If Hyperborea truly existed during a time of warmth, then such a sudden change would have been apocalyptic. Rivers turned to glass, fields to wasteland, cities entombed beneath glaciers. The north wind, Boreas himself, would have returned in fury. And just like that, the land of eternal sunlight became a wasteland of endless night. But myths insist the people did not die. They migrated. Greek sources say the Hyperboreans journeyed south, carrying their sacred knowledge with them, a migration that echoes through history as the mysterious arrival of lightbringers, teachers, and sages. Across Eurasia, stories tell of tall, luminous strangers appearing after great floods or winters, teaching agriculture, astronomy, and divine lore. In India, they were called the Rishis. In Persia, the Magi. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu. In Mesoamerica, they became the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, a pale god who came from the east bringing wisdom and then vanished. Could these figures be cultural memories of the same exiled people, the survivors of Hyperborea? Archaeology gives us subtle hints. Around 12,000 years ago, the same period that saw the last great ice age collapse, advanced agriculture, megalithic construction, and complex astronomy appeared almost simultaneously in multiple regions. Göbekli Tepe rose in Anatolia with astronomical precision. The pyramids of Egypt aligned with the stars. Sumerian priests charted the heavens. These sudden bursts of knowledge seemed to come from nowhere, as though civilization did not begin from ignorance but recovery, the recollection of something lost. Perhaps that something was the legacy of the North. The Greeks hinted at this continuity through Apollo's connection to Delphi. When he returned from Hyperborea each spring, the sacred flame of Delphi reignited and prophecy returned to the world. Without the northern light, they said, the gods fell silent. It's an eerie metaphor, as if even divine inspiration depended on a forgotten northern source. It is not difficult to imagine how such memory might persist. To the people who inherited fragments of that knowledge, the north became holy. The Egyptians called their northern lands the gate of the gods. The Vedic hymns speak of the dawn rising from the north. Even the Old Testament locates divine judgment as descending out of the sides of the north. The direction itself became sacred because it pointed back to a lost home. And yet, the silence of Hyperborea still haunts the imagination. What could drive such a civilization, peaceful, radiant, and wise, to vanish from the world so completely? Perhaps their downfall was not punishment, but inevitability. A pole shift is not merely geographical, it is metaphysical. The balance of energies that sustained their harmony may have inverted. Magnetic lines shifted, climates collapsed, and what had once been a paradise of light became a prison of ice. Their mastery of resonance, bound to the Earth's frequencies, could not survive when those frequencies changed. Still, myth insists they foresaw it. Some accounts say the Hyperboreans did not cling to survival. When the final storms came, many ascended, leaving behind their cities and bodies, dissolving into pure light, returning to the sun they had worshipped. The rest journeyed south, their radiant glow fading as they mingled with humankind, becoming priests, healers, and astronomers in new lands. In this way, the wisdom of the North did not die. It transformed. We may still feel their influence today, in the geometry of temples, in the rhythm of calendars, in the whisper of prophecy that never quite disappears. The sacred architecture of the ancient world, aligned to solstices and equinoxes, is their handwriting on the face of time. The myth of Hyperborea is not just about where civilization began, but how knowledge migrates when the world changes, how light always finds a way to survive darkness. As centuries passed, the North froze completely. The ice buried everything, preserving not ruins, but silence. To this day, scientists record magnetic irregularities beneath the Arctic crust, regions where compasses fail and electromagnetic fields pulse unpredictably. The rational explanation points to geophysics. The romantic one wonders if we are hearing the faint hum of ancient engines, the afterglow of a civilization that once lived in resonance with the Earth. In the end, the story of Hyperborea may be less about a place and more about a pattern, the eternal cycle of rise, fall, and remembrance. Every civilization begins in light, drifts into shadow, and leaves behind a trail of myths to guide the next dawn. Perhaps that is why we are drawn to these stories, because they remind us of what humanity once was and what it might become again. And so when you look to the aurora, that shimmering veil dancing across the polar sky, imagine not just particles colliding in the cold air, but the ghosts of a people who once lived beneath that same light, shaping the world with thought harmony and song. Maybe they are still there, somewhere beyond the north wind, waiting for the ice to melt, waiting for us to remember. Keep your mind open, traveler of the unknown. Some truths are not found by digging into the earth, but by listening to the silence above it, the silence that still whispers the name of Hyperborea.